Dance Your Heart on Fire podcast, episode number 15.
Welcome to the Dance Your Heart on Fire podcast, the podcast dedicated to inspiring dancers worldwide whose hearts have been touched by music and dance. The universal language of dance and music is spoken by many of us throughout the world. We want to motivate the dancer in you by sharing stories, insights, and ideas to enhance your journey. Join us now with your host, Charles Ogar.
Hello, everyone. This is Charles with the Dance Your Heart on Fire podcast. And today our special guest is Mr. Adam Taub. If you're in the Kizomba world, you probably have not heard of Adam Taub. But if you're in the salsa or particularly bachata world, it's very much more likely that you've heard of Adam Taub. He is a bachata instructor, but what's really unique about Adam Taub is that he's actually done a lot of research and a documentary into the history and the culture in the Dominican Republic and of bachata specifically, just to kind of shed some light on that. And I believe he's done several presentations around the world sharing what he's uncovered with his research and things of that nature. So I brought him on the podcast today because as I've started to study more about the history of Kizomba and just like dancing in general, you start to see some similarities in the culture and what we're dancing today. So Mr. Adam Taub will be offering us his piece of the puzzle just to kind of understand this whole partner dancing thing in the salsa, bachata, and also Kizomba world that we're dancing now, and kind of shed some light more so on those similarities that we have between these dances. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Charles. Thanks for having me on.
Yes,
appreciate it.
I definitely appreciate you taking some time out of your day to come and sit down and talk with us and share your story, your piece of the puzzle, you know?
Yeah. No, I want to say, just to start off, too, that within the last year traveling for bachata, that I've also had a lot of interesting conversations with Kizomba instructors like Lucia and Sonia and Elisa in Belgium, different people. And just, so I've really enjoyed hearing about the history a little bit. And I'm certainly not an expert on it, but I've been fascinated by it. So.
Yeah, so I mean, even though like we can't claim the title of an expert, just like you said, the fascination, the passion behind it, and like being able to share that story with our audience will be awesome, you know?
Definitely.
So let's go ahead and give the people a little bit of a background story of how you even got started into bachata.
Yeah, I mean, so really, I studied abroad in the Dominican Republic for a year when I was in university, and I was a cultural anthropology and visual arts major, and so I was, seeking to do documentary film work while I was in the university. And when I graduated, I went back to the Dominican Republic with the hope of doing a documentary on a bachata musician who I didn't know yet, but was going to go look and find one, someone that I was hoping was unknown but really talented. So, make it all long story short, but I found, put in touch with Joan Soriano and did a film on him, basically kind of lived with him on and off and followed his career in 2007, 2008, finished the film in 2009 around that time. And that was really, it was riding around with him and living with him that really gave me kind of the just in-depth time in the bachata, not only music world, but dance world. And, that I've sort of continued since then, showing the film and started to teach the dance as well and do a lot of film work related to the dance and music. I continue to do a lot of film work or video work and interviews in the Dominican Republic as well. So that's kind of the intro to it. I keep having more questions, and I'm still curious.
It's like
so I just keep going.
Yeah, I feel like the more questions you find the answers for, you just like tag along an extra 3 questions to that, to kind of keep the search going. So your introduction to bachata wasn't really more so the dance; it was the culture aspect of it, and just looking for a documentary that you would have to end up doing for your studies.
Yeah, I mean, I social danced even before. I danced salsa and a little bachata and merengue before I even studied abroad in the Dominican Republic.
Okay, gotcha.
That was one of the reasons I actually chose the Dominican Republic, because I already loved the music and dance, and I've been introduced to bachata in Washington D.C. I was coaching youth soccer, and a lot of the Latino kids from El Salvador were listening to bachata, and this was kind of the late '90s, and that was my intro. And so that's one of the reasons why I did choose the Dominican Republic. But I would say the crash course really happened doing the documentary with Joan and living with him and following him around.
Yes, that's awesome. I'll be sure that we put a link of that documentary. I'm not sure if you have it for sale or something like that, but we'll be sure to get that link from you so we can put it in the show notes of this podcast so
definitely.
People can check that out for sure. So before we move forward, I wanted to kind of pick your brain. So in some of the research that I've been doing, you hear this term ethnomusicologist. I think that's the right term for it.
Yeah.
And how these people kind of study the culture behind the music and dance. Is that a little bit what you were studying, or is the cultural anthropology something different?
It's similar, yeah, because ethnomusicology is really, usually it's oftentimes could be in the anthropology department. It's certainly a part of anthropology, and also part of music as well. I wasn't studying at the time. Cultural anthropology was a little bit of a broader term, and I was trying to study more like visual anthropology related to documentary film and how you film culture. But I have always loved music, and so I when I did decide to do that, it certainly, these last few years, I really have been focusing a lot on music.
Awesome.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. So yeah, like the studying of that musical, and even using the word anthropology, I think the only other time I heard the word anthropology is like in history class, where you just like studying like ancient things. But like, if you think about, I'm not sure the time frame of it, and we'll talk a little bit more about the names and like the time frames of these things, because partner dancing goes back centuries, and just being able to time stamp these things to come into what we have today.
Right.
All right. So you're in the Dominican Republic, you're living with Joan Soriano, and you said you danced a little bit of bachata. So obviously something happened to where you're like, okay, you feel super inspired to like delve even deeper into this. And obviously you put in a lot of work, you put in a lot of time. I'm not sure if you did the editing of the video on your own, but all that stuff is very time consuming. So where did the passion and the inspiration come from to dedicate that time and to continue to search more and more? Was it a particular instance that happened? Was it something that happened? Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I did do all the editing and still do all the editing. So I do the film work and the editing. So it does take a lot of time.
That's awesome.
And the passion for dance was still there. Was there even when I was doing the film. Although I oftentimes say that I tell people, when I'm down in the DR, there's so many trips because I'm filming so much and watching, observing. I may dance one song in a month-long trip, and that's not even an exaggeration on some of the trips. But I still always felt like I came back more inspired. In a sense, you could, in quotes, better dancer too, just because observing people and watching people that are inspired, watching the culture, watching people just expressing themselves in their lives through music and dance.
It's like picking up a little bit through osmosis.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I definitely felt, because you watch it long enough, you certainly want to get up and look forward to that time when you could set the camera down and dance. But so at that same time, besides Joanne, I was also spent a lot of time with his parents, Juana, his mom, and Kande, his dad. Kande's passed away a couple of years ago, but his dad was just loved music, more than almost anybody I've ever met. Loved to dance. Anytime merengue, bachata came on, he was up dancing. And so, I would say he was, as far as the bachata dance, he's really my biggest influence and my kind of biggest hero. And I actually did a documentary on them as well, which I'm currently trying to release. So I spend a lot of time with his
awesome.
parents. Yeah. Yep. So that was certainly part of the inspiration, was his dad and his family, and these shows, just watching when you go to a music show, you're around dancers as well, so.
No, it's awesome, because I recently posted something on Facebook about just how inspiration, regardless, inspiration is not something that's limited to just music and dance. It can be through art, it can be through sports, it can be through writing, it can be through a lot of things, inventing something new. And it's almost like it's a candle. I made the similarity or the comparison of a candle is like one candle can light 1,000 other candles without diminishing the flame of its own, So it's kind of like you went there and you kind of had your candle lit by somebody else's quote unquote inspiration or candle, and now that's allowing you to give you the fire to put in that time and effort to kind of continue to research more. So that's awesome that he inspired you to do that. Yeah, and there's
you have also you start to gain a sense of responsibility too of when you see a dance internationalize and spread around the world. You also feel a sense of responsibility to share the stories of those that have nurtured it, those who have created it, who have lived it, who may not have an international voice. And so certainly there's been times where it's out of that sense of responsibility of kind of telling or sharing people's stories that I've continued on or thought, I need to answer this question or need to share this. So but it's been definitely an honor and a really enriching experience. So
I like that word, the responsibility. That reminds me of I'm not sure if you've seen the Spider-Man movie, but there's this one quote that says, with great power comes great responsibility. And that power can definitely be knowledge, and so when you do have that knowledge, then it's almost you have the responsibility to share that, you do. Because not everybody, a lot of in dance world, especially social dance, a lot of the people that have supported it and created it are not necessarily performers or teachers or making a living off of it. And it's important to hear, I think, from kind of not just the dancers, but kind of the quote voiceless musicians and dancers that don't always get the publicity. So that's certainly one of my, I would think, my drives. That's try to find those stories. That's awesome. All right, Adam. So let's go ahead and roll up our sleeves a little bit, and let's see what we can. Let's see what we can kind of uncover with what you can share as far as like your pieces of the puzzle. I know you said at the beginning you weren't an expert, but you do have some insights that I'm pretty sure that'll be awesome to put out there with our audience and the people in dance world, so they can start to see these similarities that kind of unite us a little bit. You mentioned merengue dancing before, and we've heard that bachata comes from merengue. So my question was what insights do you have as far as that story of how merengue became bachata? Was it mixed with another rhythm, like merengue plus something equals bachata? Give us some insight into that, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people heard about it, but they haven't really sat down and talked about it,
Yeah, so, the genre of bachata has, in a sense, it has only been around since the early 60s. And even at that time, it wasn't even called bachata. So the word bachata was sort of put on the music and dance more toward the 70s and then into the 80s. And so, it's more of a matter of a genre coalescing into something, becoming its own. There wasn't necessarily one moment in time when in my opinion, when it was born, where it wasn't and then it was. It did, of course, have these influences in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the major music and dance forms that were in the Dominican Republic before bachata were merengue, of course,
mm-hmm.
bolero,
mm-hmm.
which is a Latin American guitar tradition, son, which
mm-hmm.
is also very famous in Cuba and one of the precursors to salsa and so many other music.
And there's a link between Cuba and Angola as well, so it's interesting.
And that song is that's a big link probably between kizomba and bachata.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it would be son. And then you also have different Afro-Dominican spiritual musics and dance, or non-secular, like palos, they call palos, and there's a variety of others as well that of course existed and still exist.
Mm-hmm.
And those would be, and then you also had guaracha and kind of like a little bit faster paced son, almost more into the salsa, what we would consider salsa. You had that as well. So those were some of the major, music and dance genres that influenced bachata.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the closest one probably was really, in a sense, bolero, because early bachata in the 60s was actually referred to as bolero. So the early Dominican guitarists, many of whom are still performing today, at that time they were referring to their music as bolero, oftentimes, or música de guitarra, guitar music.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really out of that bachata developed, but it has, very strong influence in the dance and the music from son, from merengue, and from some of the Afro-Dominican spiritual music and dances as well. So
it's really interesting to hear Afro-Dominican, because I recently got a chance to go to the Music Instrument Museum that's in Phoenix, Arizona, and looking at the history of a lot of these cultures, you see Afro was like a prefix to a lot of things. Afro-Brazilian, Afro-Cuban, right. Afro-Dominican. And it's like, I guess this comes from the whole slave trade and getting all these different Africans in these different areas, and how that just immediately started fusing with whatever was there already, and that became a culture. And I'm pretty sure we're going to have some time to talk about your definition of culture, because culture is such an intertwined web of a lot of things, that some things are under our control and some things aren't really under our control at the time, and that all affects us,
Yeah.
The question that's kind of jumping out to the top of me in my head right now is the previous dances that you said before, bolero, son, merengue. Were these known as partner dances, or were some of these solo dancing to where it's not really danced with a male and a female, and it's just kind of done in a group, versus an actual male and female partner dance?
Yeah. So merengue generally is a partner dance.
Mm-hmm.
Although if you go back and still watch some of the performances, there are times when the partners may not be physically connected.
Mm-hmm,
they may be dancing and they're not necessarily physically connected. But generally, socially now, you do maintain that connection once in a while, releasing it. The same with bolero and son. Definitely has that especially traditionally, and even bachata traditionally, is danced. You would be dancing in closed position. Now you'll see, of course, bachata danced in open position with your touching two hands. You're dancing in a more open position, but traditionally it was danced in a closed position and maintaining that contact. And so but as far as palos, which is that more spiritual dance.
Is that P-A-L-O-S?
Yeah, P-A-L-O-S.
Okay, awesome. I'm taking notes.
Yeah. that is not danced in partners for the most part, you know. I'm sure it could be, but it's not danced in a sort of ballroom type embrace or anything like that. And even sometimes in the ceremonies, you know, participants, they'll say montado or overcome might be the English translation, but they're sort of overcome and almost kind of out of body in a way, and they'll dance. So there's certain ceremonies that will happen, you know, whether it's a celebration or at a mourning or a mass or some sort. So, but that type of dance, yeah, there's certainly a big tradition in those. That's not really a partner dance as we would think about it, you know, in the social dance world. So, well, I do want to say just something related to the term Afro-Dominican. You know, certain musicians in the Dominican Republic, although their music might have, or does have, you know, African influence of various degrees, some musicians or some dancers may accept that term, may accept the term Afro, or in a sense even accept the term, the African roots of some of the cultural aspects, while others don't. And I'm not going to get into the whole thing because that's a long conversation on its own, but within the Dominican Republic, at least having an idea of the acceptance and the rejection of a certain amount of African culture to varying degrees within the society is pretty, it's kind of important when you're starting to look at, you know, the dance and the music and anything else you might be looking at there. But I just wanted to bring that up because it's a term that I'm using now for this interview, but you know, within the Dominican Republic, there might be varying degrees of acceptance of that term.
That is really interesting to hear you say that, because I just watched a documentary on tango, and I mean, just like you said, Afro-Dominican, there's Afro-Argentine as well.
Right.
And there is a varying level of acceptance into the people there of like how much of the African roots is accepted in the society, depending on different people, you know? And there are people who were born in Argentina who feel like they've kind of been forgotten because it feels like society is trying to like sweep that part of the history under the rug, you know?
Yeah.
Because there's definitely some African influence in tango when you go back far enough. But of course, if you just typed in tango on Google right now, you're not going to see an African couple or anything like that dancing tango, you know? And that just brings up all kinds of different questions in my head. Because definitely there was a lot of like the African diaspora they were spread out to a lot of different places during the slave trade, you know, and they brought with them this richness of culture that brought forth a lot of these partner dances that we have today, but it's not really common knowledge, you know. Like we could say, oh yeah, there's African roots, but then to really study that, I mean, like that's like the tip of the iceberg. I'm pretty sure there's so much history that can go behind that.
Oh yeah, right.
And
there's of course so many, you know, depending on which part of Africa, you know, the people were coming into which
you know,
islands or which countries.
And what's to say that there weren't multiple influences of Africans, you know? Like let's say we had maybe three different places of African countries landed in one spot, you know?
Exactly.
It's really hard, you know?
Yeah, you can see how so many questions, you know, develop. There's never really an end to.
No, it's really interesting. And then another point that kind of made out to me, like when you were talking about the ceremonial spiritual dances, you know, that reminded me of like the orishas from the Cubans. And they had, it seems like sometimes like the further back that you go back in time with these music and dances wasn't really like a social fun thing. It was more of a ceremonial thing that was used to celebrate particular, I guess, milestones in life, you know, but it wasn't really, oh, I'm bored on a Friday, let's go out dancing. It was really something more behind that, you know?
Right, definitely.
So that's always interesting as well. Yeah,
it's really interesting. And I like that word milestones because going for healing, you know, someone's sick or whether it's someone passed away, these different different milestones in which music and dance comes in. So
that's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting, you know, because now social dancing is more of a hobby. You know, it's not really like a ceremonial kind of thing, you know. But the further you go back, it's definitely more ceremonial, you know, and it's not limited to just like even the Afro-Latin dances. Even if you take a look at Indian dances or Asian dances like that, they definitely had ceremonial dancing, you know.
Yeah,
very interesting.
And I would say, like, even you know, and I always try to during my presentations kind of let people know about the significance dance and music has to a particular country or culture. You know, beyond just a hobby or beyond just a nighttime fun thing to do. You know, I remember I interviewed Ramon Cordero, who's one of the great voices of bachata, who started in the 60s. And, you know, he told me he thinks that bachata has done a lot for the people. And he said, imagine you're working in, you know, the hot Caribbean sun all day, dust in your nostrils, underneath your fingernails. You know, imagine what music does to someone like that to come home at the end of the day and have that little bit of relief, that bit of joy. So whether you're talking about joyful music or nostalgic or sad music, music is also a way to, in a sense, to get by or to express and to deal with your situation.
Definitely.
So it is more than just even socially, it's more than just a fun thing to do at times.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that for sure. I could definitely see that. It's like going through life, you know, and that those songs almost are mementos to particular life experiences, you know.
Right.
Definitely. So we're going to touch on that a little bit towards the end of the podcast, on how to kind of like that global culture aspect, you know, and the nostalgic feeling. Definitely. So what I like to do now is shift our historical focus to Haiti. I learned about Haiti and Kompa, and I'm pretty sure you've heard about that as well through the Kizomba world, you know. And then you take a look at the map and you see that Haiti is right smack dab between or next to the Dominican Republic. So you seem to have these two unique kind of worlds very close to each other on a very small island, you know, but still two very distinct cultures, you know. On the Dominican Republic, you have like merengue, you have bachata, you have Spanish, you know, and you go on the other side of the island and you have more of a French influence and you have compa and things like that. So I guess feel free to share anything that you know between the two. I'm pretty sure there has to be some history between the wars and colonizing and how that ended up to be the way it is that it is now. But I'll go ahead and let you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's definitely a big topic and something that I've been interested in since I've been going to the Dominican Republic as far as the Dominican-Haitian relations and relationship, and also when I started studying more of the music and dance, you know, what is specifically what is some of the Haitian influence on bachata specifically and merengue. But yes, they share the same island, the island of Hispaniola, and population-wise, they're about the same. Haiti has about 1/3 of the island, and Dominican Republic's about 2/3 land mass, and so yeah, there's some striking differences. For instance, the language, French and Creole in Haiti, and then Spanish in the Dominican Republic, and a lot of differences, but certainly there's a lot of shared culture and shared influence, and a lot of times that's not acknowledged by either side, right? Because and I'm not going to get into the whole history, but there has been a number of conflicts between the countries.
Yeah, I've seen some of that as well, for sure.
Maybe we could put some good links for people to kind of look up some of the history, but
definitely,
you know, there's at times been kind of a conflict between the cultures and the people. But as far as what I can sort of share specific to the music in the Dominican Republic is, I've certainly interviewed and been around a lot of Haitians living in the Dominican Republic.
Mm-hmm.
I've interviewed quite a number of Haitian bachata musicians.
That's something I never heard of before.
Yeah.
Haitian bachata musicians.
Yeah. Yeah, I just released a interview segment by a musician named Felix Kumbe.
Mm-hmm.
Felix Kumbe, who's probably the most famous bachata musician of Haitian descent.
Mm-hmm.
And he lives in the Dominican Republic and has been there a long time now and considers himself, in a sense, both Haitian and Dominican.
Mm-hmm.
And he's had hits. First, he's had hits in merengue.
Mm-hmm.
He's also had hits in Kompa, because he returned to Haiti for a while and had some big hits in Kompa. And then later, which he is now, he considers himself a bachatero, and he has hits in bachata. But,
how interesting is that?
Yeah, so he's the most well-known, but, there's been a number of musicians, very well-known musicians over the years. Some of them were of Haitian descent, and some of them were not necessarily publicly, in a sense, didn't necessarily announce that they were of Haitian descent, but they were. And so, yeah, it's been a really interesting sort of, and I'm currently, that's something I'm looking at, so there's definitely a lot more to look at. But
no, for sure.
And when you look at the dance as well, I can't say every specific, because I'm also not an expert on Kompa.
Exactly.
Although I have filmed some Kompa Haitians in the Dominican dancing Kompa, so I know something about it. But what are some of those influences and those overlaps? Pretty convinced there are some. I just can't say,
for certain exactly where it's coming from. Yeah, for sure. But sometimes now, we talk about cultural fusion, and it's like you say, oh, I'm not an expert. But at the same time, like with your eyes, you have a general sense of, okay, well, this kind of looks similar, But now imagine, let's say a 15-year-old, who is watching a couple dance Kompa, and then he sees another couple dance bachata, and he's like, well, he's just exposed to those similarities, and he may or may not put two and two together, But if he does, he's not going to go and check the history or anything like that. He's just going to maybe do a step or a style or something like that has maybe a Kompa influence, or vice versa, maybe a little bit of a bachata into that, And it doesn't become an official, okay, I'm creating something new, but it's just, okay, I'm just going to express myself in this way. I'm definitely interested to hear more about that artist. We'll put some links into that of the Haitian Dominican. Yeah,
because he's amazing, and and even related to the dance, I was with Joanne a couple weeks ago during a visit, and I was doing some filming, some dancers, and one of the dancers we were filming was a Haitian man living in the Dominican Republic, an amazing dancer, and I was like, man, I was talking to Joanne after a little bit about the style, and Joanne said something. He said, that he saw kind of a Kompa influence in his style, and I was like, oh yeah, interesting. Like, and it was just interesting to hear that. Joanne's he's obviously an expert in bachata,
definitely,
way more so than I am, but he doesn't necessarily always focus on the dance. He's been around the dance, but he doesn't, analyze it in the same way. But it was just really interesting to hear that. So certainly, it's probably important for like the listeners to be aware just a little bit. Bachata was a very marginalized music and dance in the Dominican Republic. It still is to some degree. A lot of the marginalization and discrimination is gone now there. It's more accepted among the media, the upper class, among all classes. But, traditionally it was viewed as, sort of simple music of the, quote, the lower class, vulgar, country, unsophisticated. So it was viewed that way.
Tango had the same history.
Did it?
Yeah. When it first started off, it was like it's what like what you would see like the prostitutes dance with their men and stuff like that.
And a lot of bachata was, in a sense, relegated to being played in cabarets or brothels and such.
That's crazy.
It wasn't only that.
You know?
It wasn't only that, but it of course, it wasn't able to be played on the radio or national, on TV or things like that. So, where does it go? And, but yeah, it's important to understand that, because then you also understand, well, who was listening to it, who was supporting it, and who was creating the dance, and where was it at. And so when you look at places like Bates, Bates is a town, in a sense, or a place that grew up around sugarcane cutting in the Dominican Republic, oftentimes Haitian and Dominican in nature, but a lot of Haitians, work the cane cutting. And those were also places where bachata, thrived, and a lot of the bachata musicians played that circuit, in a sense. And so the music and the dance was also developing there.
No, it's very interesting. And like we said at the beginning of the podcast, like these dances that seem to be separate worlds or do have a lot of similarities, Tango was definitely something that was viewed lower class. It wasn't considered something that was upscale at all, but if you take a look at tango now, it's very upscale. So it's interesting to see how the image has changed over time from when it first started to where it is now,
Yeah.
Very really interesting stuff. All right, so I appreciate everything that you shared with us so far. This is really interesting things. Just like you said, they're just random pieces of the puzzle that we're kind of like adding to the mix, but it's like, I don't think anybody has all the puzzle pieces, but as we start to find out more, I'm pretty sure on one of my podcasts, I'll maybe interview somebody from Haiti, or if you have any recommendations or somebody from Haiti like that knows a lot about compa and the dance, maybe they can share some of their insights, and then we can compare notes with this podcast and do the same thing with maybe somebody from Cuba and somebody from Cape Verde. I had a Cape Verdean artist, Quenda Lima, who's a well-known instructor, and he shared his insights into it as well, So I feel like there's a lot of shared similarities. Yes, there's differences, but I feel like it's really interesting to kind of see how these concurrent influences were happening in different areas, because you keep hearing like this span of like the 60s, 70s, and 80s had a lot to go of what was going on during that time period,
Yeah, no, I'd be fascinated to hear some of those interviews you mentioned too, and just
yes, definitely,
I'll get those pieces.
Yeah, for sure. I'll keep you in the loop as far as those go. Yeah,
and I definitely think some of that Cuban, as far as some of that shared influence, but Cuban son and bolero and also like danzón and things like that would be, as you mentioned, that Cuban influence in Angola, and I don't know. There's definitely some trails to follow with that, and those were, I think son is very well known, as in its influence in salsa, and we hear a lot about that. But it certainly, dance and music wise, also had a big influence on bachata as well. So it's influenced a lot of different.
Yeah, for sure.
And the Dominican Republic had and has its own living son tradition that goes back well over 100 years. So the Dominican Republic also has a tradition of son music.
Have you heard of any plena music in the Dominican Republic?
Plena from Puerto Rico? I really, in my travels in the Dominican Republic, haven't heard a lot about it, except I have heard, plena and like Jibaro music from Puerto Rico. So there's a eastern part of the Dominican Republic can pick up and could pick up radio stations from Puerto Rico, and so different bachata musicians have told me that they believe that when we're talking regional styles of music, regional styles of bachata music, that eastern coast of the Dominican Republic that was picking up this Puerto Rican influence, they feel like you can hear that in the bachata music. So
that is so crazy,
So in that sense, of course, I've heard of it, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't necessarily hear musicians or people talking about it all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting because we talked about influence, and like you said before, and I think you hit it on the nail, varying degrees of influence, and sometimes you have
Right.
more of a direct influence, and then you have something that's kind of a faint radio signal,
Right.
So you don't
Yeah,
get to
right.
see people dancing or anything like that, but you just so happen to pick up on the radio station. So that's something
Yeah.
that's something that, I mean, that was kind of accident, like people in Puerto Rico
Yeah.
aren't thinking about people listening to their stations in the Dominican Republic, but they're still kind of close, at the same time,
Yeah. Yeah.
Dominican
and it's,
go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, and these bachata musicians are largely, ear musicians. They're self-taught
Mm-hmm.
by ear, and the really influential bachata musicians, and so, they're copying what they can
Mm-hmm.
from the radio, from jukeboxes,
Mm-hmm.
and from live musicians that they're listening to, and they of course have very good ears, but it also gives room or gives enough space for certain changes to occur, if you're not reading music, or if you're not
Exactly.
if you're not even playing off recordings always, if you're hearing something and then trying something on your own, or hearing
Mm-hmm.
it on the jukebox, hearing it on the radio. So it's really interesting. Yeah. And like you said, you're hearing this music you like, but you may not know how it's danced from the place
Where it
that
originated.
being broadcast,
Mhm.
and that's always interesting. And I think that is very relevant to, bachata internationally, because people have responded all over the world to bachata music,
Mhm.
and they may not know they may not even know it's from the Dominican Republic, and
True.
they certainly may not know how it's danced there, but
Mhm.
they're responding to the music.
Mhm.
And in many ways, oftentimes they'll create their own way to express themselves with that music.
Exactly.
So,
No, and it kind of gives a whole new meaning or a whole new perspective to the word culture, And I think this would be a good, I guess, kind of ending point for the podcast, Like we just kind of shared knowledge from each other, and it's just like, well, ooh, look at this, and then look at
Right.
that, and look at this, and it's like, and we're just kind of like, I feel like we're not even opening the door to like these
Right.
similarities. We're kind of like looking at the door of these similarities, And I'm pretty sure there's so much history behind those, but like you said, the artists were very much so by ear, and the same thing can be said for the dance. Across tango, across salsa, it's like they didn't go to a dance studio to learn how to dance. They
Right.
watched their parents dance, and now there's something within them that kind of helps them form their own style. There's something within them that helped them form their own style of playing a guitar or playing an accordion or playing something in their own way. Nobody really taught them how to do it, but it was just something that came from that inspiration from this unknown source, of happiness, or something that kind of sparked them into that,
right.
And so
Exactly.
taking a look at how you're saying before, it's like some people might hear bachata music and know nothing about where it came from, where it originated, but they're touched by it, and it gets them to express themselves in a way that's something. I mean, let's say you're in Russia and people hear bachata music and they've only done some kind of Russian dance before, and so they find a way to kind of intermingle the two, and that becomes something. So it's really interesting to see the global exchange of inspiration and music and dance and things like that. And so with that being said, and knowing what you know and those similarities, how has your vision or your definition of culture changed over time? Because it's almost like trying to define a moving target, because it's not something that's stagnant, and it's something that definitely has a lot of different influences of varying degrees from multiple different things,
Yeah. That's a good point. It's not standing still. And so, and you want to resist trying to put a culture or anything just like in a museum, lock it up, put it in the frame. And at the same time, you want to, of course, seek those who came before and seek the stories and seek the roots, but without putting it in a museum. So, I certainly try to encourage anybody any students or anybody that's trying to look at different questions and issues to study it, because I think there's so many questions. I never really have the feeling like oh, I want to do this and no one else should look at it, or I'm going to keep this secret,
for
because
sure.
I think there's so many questions, and because it's a living, breathing sort of thing, the culture, there's never going to be a lack of things to look at. So I definitely try to encourage other people to, follow their passions or their curiosities. I kind of try to keep a pretty broad view of culture, and it's mostly built on a lot of like the personal stories that I've gathered from music and dancers over the years. I kind of have locked those interviews and those personal stories away, and a lot of times you may have two experts, for instance, two living legends that basically created a genre that disagree with each other. They're both are very valid. They've both been doing it for 50 plus years. They both lived it, and yet they have a different view of how this genre was created, when it was created, what it is. And that says a lot. I mean, you can have that. You can have those disagreements, and that's fine. So I kind of try to lock away all these different points of view and synthesize something.
Yeah, it's tough. It's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not an easy thing to even, if someone asks you to define, which people do ask me, or I've had to in a documentary, define bachata. For me, that's not an easy thing to do, because I have all these different stories. I do ask all these musicians I interview or dancers, I do ask them what do they think is the essence or what it is to them. And you get all these different pieces, kind of like what you're doing with these podcasts. You get different pieces and then you kind of put it together
and compare them, but it's not really a final answer, It's
not
just
a final answer.
It's just a knowing, but you can't really define it is, So now it's like with all this research that I've been doing for Kizomba and just dancing in general, it's like, well, what is Kizomba? And it's like you just get like all these stories coming into your head. It's like I even know like where to begin to kind of tell you. I can give you a simple answer, but like there's so much backstory to a lot of it,
There is,
but even along those differences, I feel you see inspiration, you see happiness, you see life, you see people that were influenced by maybe the same thing, but just in varying degrees of it, Let's say like you have this Haitian Dominican artist, of course his influence to Haiti is going to be very much so direct because he's from there, so his degree is going to be high as far as Haitian/Kompa influence, but then you might have somebody like an artist who maybe went to maybe two of his concerts and liked something that he did, and maybe he incorporated a little bit of that into his style or dance, and so his influence is still there from Haiti through an artist that comes from there, but the degree of that is lower, but like to even be able to measure degrees of influence is like hard to like even think of, but I just think it's just really interesting to see the similarities of what unites us and how it's really, I remember looking at this one image, and I'm pretty sure to put it on the podcast, there's different levels of culture. And you have like societal culture, and then you have like national culture, and then there's also a global culture, and I feel now with the internet and everything, like we're able to kind of see what's happening, and we're like pretty much very well connected with the internet now. But before, like back in the 60s, that didn't happen, So the influence between different societies and countries, and even like the borders of what we have now wasn't the same 100 years ago, So a lot of these countries with their borders now, like we're looking at them now, but that's not the way that they always were. And going back, like even with Angola and was once the same entity with Congo, and that got separated.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure like with Dominican Republic and Haiti, that was one entity, and then it got separated, you know? But that doesn't separate the influence between the two just because you draw a line in between it on the map, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And also it's kind of like, influence doesn't just go one way. It oftentimes can
definitely.
go
It's a two-way street.
both ways. And, and so you got to look at the Haitian influence in Dominican music. You got to look at the Dominican influence in Haitian music. And then in relation to like the Caribbean, it's very common to hear, okay, yeah, there's African influence in Caribbean music, but then when you look at, well, there's also Caribbean influence and other influence in African music and dance, and so to really look how this shared thing is going back and forth, and to what degree. The degree is important to measure. It's not enough just to say there's shared influence. If you want to get in depth, you do want to look at all the degrees of influence. And yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is very fascinating. All right, Adam, so the next question that I'd like to ask you here is, knowing what you know about the history of bachata and seeing where it is now, and you being able to travel and kind of share this historical knowledge of bachata, what trends do you see about it moving forward into the future?
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult question. It's hard to predict because, certainly we're seeing bachata, it seems really, really gain in popularity as it's moving around the globe, internationalizing and being taught and listened to in a lot of different places. So, you're seeing it danced a lot of different ways. You're starting to see a variety of kind of almost subgenres of the music develop. And so it is hard to it's really hard to predict because this real surge hasn't been going on, at least in the festival world and in the social dance world, that long for bachata. So I think when kind of looking at the language where it's going, it is important for everybody just to keep in mind that the language and the understanding is different depending on what context it's coming from. So for instance, in the Dominican Republic, the words modern bachata or traditional bachata or urban bachata or whatever, have different meaning, and are used differently than they are in the festival dance world. The meaning's completely different, and when or how much they're even used is completely different. And so, when we have this conversation about what's happening internationally or where it's going and the positives and challenges with it, it is important to kind of clarify from what point of view we're talking about, because there are a number of different worlds in bachata music and dance that don't really know or are just beginning to realize that the other exists. The international world, to some degree, those that are just becoming aware of the music and liking the music, it takes them some time perhaps to trace it back where this thing they love comes from or where it developed. And likewise, many of the musicians and dancers in the Dominican Republic have no idea that it's that there's bachata festivals, and that it's being taught and listened to such a degree. So I guess what I think in the coming years we'll probably see maybe a little bit coming together of those things, at least in awareness, but at the same time there'll probably be we'll also continue to see a broadening or moving apart too.
Definitely.
Things becoming, in a sense, more unique to themselves and maybe less related to the original form and stuff. And we've seen that already too.
The same exact thing is happening in Kizomba.
You think so? Both kind of the moving away and also in some communities the the realizing that they exist.
Yes, definitely. Like I feel like bachata and kizomba can both be used as an umbrella term, you know, and over time, like this umbrella has been getting stretched and stretched and stretched to try to encompass all of these different subgenres and styles of music and dance, and now it's getting to a point to where it's so far away from the original that the I feel like the umbrella it can be stretched only so far before we need to come up with a new name, you know.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting, you know, because like even giving things names, like you don't even know what to name anything anymore. Like, is it traditional? Is it folkloric? Is it classical? Is it historic? Is it authentic? Like, and like it means different things to different people in different places. So it's like,
yeah, that's it.
It's hard because there's no
hard.
Yeah, there's no committee that gets together and kind of irons out the definition of these things, you know. And a lot of these dances and things like that have been kind of growing independent of each other. But like you said, like we're realizing the spectrum, how wide the spectrum is now on both sides, you know, like the more quote unquote urban neo people are starting to see more about the original, and like the original folks are starting to see how far it's going on the other side. And like maybe it's going to come to the point where we do have like a committee that's able to like define these things, you know, because if we keep going at this pace and seeing how vast the expanse of music and dance is, like there has to be a better way to like officially name things. But at the same time, it's going to be hard because there's a lot of influences from a lot of different places, you know?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think it's important that we, you know, that people find ways to like meet or even somehow forums, but people, you know, whether it's instructors or promoters, to get together and kind of almost private, almost like a conference situation, and kind of discuss some of these things. And, you know, it's tough because like what I said before, as far as in the social dance, a lot of the unheard voices, you know, people that aren't making their living on it, but that have contributed greatly to it, aren't going to be part of the committee necessarily. And so the tough part is, well, how do you get those opinions and voices into the whole mix?
In an unbiased way.
In an unbiased way, yeah. So I think it's important. It will be challenging, but you know, it's definitely worthwhile for people to kind of be able to get together in a non-conflictive way and talk it out.
And that's the main thing. Like I wanted to have is like we have these similarities, you know, but we have differences as well, you know. But it's one thing to just focus on the differences and like have conflicts, you know, or you can focus on the similarities and they can be more of a peaceful kind of sharing of ideas and things like that, you know, because I don't think anyone is getting into the dance world or anything like that to like harm anybody or to be disrespectful to anyone or anything like that. Like at the end of the day, people do want to have fun and things like that. But I feel sharing this knowledge is going to get or inspire more of a peaceful understanding of what's going on, and just seeing like, hey, it's not something that's necessarily my cup of tea, but I could see where they're coming from, you know? Right.
Yeah, I definitely hope so. I mean, and there will be disagreements, and that's good, but as long as it's in a constructive way.
It's for possible. Sure. Yeah, it's very interesting. Like there's so much, I don't know, like I feel like it's uncovering knowledge, but at the same time, it's like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. So it's like, am I getting more knowledgeable on the topic, or am I just realizing how much I don't know about the topic, you know? Because you're just seeing how much is out there. So I definitely appreciate you sharing your insights, because it kind of feel like it gives more light into like the history behind it and belonging to that culture and getting to know more about the intricacies of it, you know. And like we're taking a look at the history, but at the same time we are the history of the future, you know. So it's like putting this information out there, I feel it's just going to help other people maybe that's going to be doing some research kind of put some of these things together, you know, and start to see those similarities that unite us more than they should be dividing us, more so than anything.
Yeah, I definitely hope it, you know, set some people on some paths, some exploration, and so it's a really enriching opportunity, you know, if you have that kind of passion for the music and dance, or even just people, you know, and
Definitely.
what they make, what they do. So
yeah, and this magical thing that's called life that happened, and all these things happen maybe before we're even born, you know, but we're able to enjoy kind of like the fruits of what these people did today, you know.
Right.
All right, Adam, thanks so much for your time. It was awesome to kind of share those similarities. I'll be sure to grab those links from you so we can share them in the notes. At this time, I just want to give people, give you an opportunity to let people know how to find out more about you, and then we'll say goodbye.
Okay. Thank you so much, Charles. It's a very enjoyable conversation for sure. Really enjoyed it. To find out, let's see, more about me, one, there's that the documentary film on Joanne. It's called The Duke of Bachata. You can find that on Amazon, I think, for a download, and we'll have links. You can find me on Facebook, just under Adam Taub Bachata is just a page where I post videos and research and presentations I'm doing. Also, I have a YouTube channel where I post short, free videos of like the Felix Cumbe, the Haitian bachata musician, and I have Luis Segura, many bachata musicians on there. So, and I give history presentations, history bachata culture presentations around the U.S. and around the world. So I guess you can just look out for that in the next year at different festivals or sometimes at universities and things. So yeah, I would just and again I want to say I really have enjoyed like the conversation in the past year with Kizomba instructors and people looking at that history. That's really fascinated me and kind of intrigued me. So
it's like these things crossed paths before in the past, you know, but now we're able to kind of take a look at it from in retrospect and see the similarities between them, you know.
Right. Yeah, it's I think I'm really interested in the next couple of years kind of what you guys find out in some of this research.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I'm interviewing more and more people with the podcast, you know, and it's like I don't know exactly where it's going to be heading or where I'm going to find, but like there's definitely a common thread between a lot of these, you know, and some varying degrees of influence between a lot of these dances that seem to be their own worlds, but at the same time they still share these similarities between the two. Like salsa, bachata, kizomba, and tango.
Right.
And even with kompa, like there's some other ones, you know, but there's definitely some similarities between the hold and the frame and the music and all that stuff. All right. I hope you guys enjoy this week's podcast. Be sure to check us out again next week. Thank you for checking out the Dance Your Heart on Fire podcast today. Be sure to check out neokizomba.com for links to everything that we chatted about today, as well as some awesome free resources to enhance your Kizomba journey.